Tuesday, 2:47 p.m. Deborah Kessler stood on my grandfather's land in $400 boots, clipboard against her chest, and said the words I'd never forget. Mr. Prentice, this spring stopped being yours the day we poured the concrete. Behind her, two men in HOA polos were finishing the job. Wet concrete, grey and glistening, sealed over the mouth of the hot spring my family had tended for 4 generations. Steam still killed up through the cracks, like the land itself was trying to breathe one last time before they choked it. Here are the numbers so you understand what we're dealing with. $2.4 million. That's what Deborah Kessler raised selling lifetime spa memberships to people who thought they were buying access to a natural hot spring. 340 families paid $6,800 each for a resource she never owned. 46 homes on Cedar Hollow Lane ran their heat off geothermal lines tied to that same spring, lines built before any of them were born. By the time the first hard freeze hit that December, every one of those 46 homes would have no heat at all. Pipes bursting in the walls, furnaces useless because they'd never needed real furnaces to begin with. And by the end of it, Deborah Kessler would owe more money than she ever managed to collect, and almost none of it would be about the spa. What she didn't know, standing there in her tailored blazer with her clipboard and her Range Rover idling on my gravel road, was that 40 years before she ever heard the words geothermal amenity, I had my own hands in that rock. I built the pipe she was standing on. I stamped the drawings. My signature was still down there somewhere, under 110 years of mineral deposit and family history. She thought she was capping a hot spring. She was capping a bomb with a very long fuse. My name is Walter Prentice. I'm 64 years old, and until 3 years ago, I spent my career as a geothermal engineer, first for the state, then for private ranches all across the high desert. But before any of that, before license plates and pension checks, I was a boy standing barefoot in the steam that rose off Cedar Hollow Creek, watching my grandfather, Ezra Prentice, coax hot water out of the ground like he was arguing with an old friend. Ezra founded this ranch in 1911, 320 acres of high desert scrub that nobody else wanted, because nobody else understood what was underneath it. He found the spring by accident, following a deer trail through frost one January morning, and found the ground steaming when everything else was frozen white. He called it the Blue Vein, for the way the mineral water ran turquoise over the limestone in summer light. He built the first wooden pipe himself, hollowed out pine logs fitted end to end, running heat down through the property to the barn, the bunkhouse, and eventually the main house. My father extended it in the 50s with iron. I extended it myself in 1987 when the county wanted proof the water table was stable enough to support new construction 2 miles downhill, construction that would one day become Cedar Hollow Estates. I still have the original drawings, vellum, yellowed at the edges, rolled tight in a cardboard tube my grandfather kept in the tack room. My signature is on 3 of the 4 sheets, dated June 1987, right below Ezra's own hand from 1911, because I traced his original survey lines before I dared change a single measurement. That tube smells like machine oil and dust and something like a cellar. When I open it, I can still hear the way my father used to say, "Measure twice, boy, the ground doesn't forgive twice." The ranch itself still carries all 3 of them. Ezra's grave sits under the cottonwood by the creek, my father's beside him, and my mother's a few feet over, her headstone facing east so she gets the first light every morning, the way she liked it in life. On cold mornings, the whole graveyard steams faintly from the ground heat rising beneath it, like the land is keeping them warm even now. The hot spring wasn't just plumbing to us, it was inheritance. Ezra's will, dated 1958, left the ranch and all appurtenant water and mineral rights to my father, then to me. Appurtenant, a lawyer's word for comes with the land, no matter who builds a fence around it. I didn't think much about that clause for 60 years. I would think about it a great deal soon enough. Deborah Kessler moved into Cedar Hollow Estates 9 years ago, back when it was still half-built lots and construction dust. She didn't buy in because she loved the mountains. She bought in because she saw an opportunity: thermal water on adjacent land, a developer eager for an amenity to sell the last 40 homes, and an HOA board too polite, too trusting, or too distracted to ask hard questions. By the time I met her, she was HOA president, driving a white Range Rover with a vanity plate that read SPAQUEEN, wearing designer blazers to board meetings held in a clubhouse that smelled like new carpet and chlorine. She carried a clipboard everywhere, like it gave her legal standing. In a way, for a while, it did. People believed clipboards. People believed confidence. Deborah Kessler had learned that a woman who speaks fast enough and smiles thin enough rarely gets questioned by homeowners who just want peace and a working thermostat. She'd started selling founders' memberships to the Cedar Hollow Wellness Spa 2 years before I ever saw a bulldozer near my spring. Lifetime access, she called it. Exclusive geothermal heat contracts for the 46 homes closest to the amenity. Guaranteed low utility costs for life, she called that too. All of it built on water she did not own, piped from a source she did not control, sealed under a permit she never actually held. I didn't know any of that yet, standing in my barnyard, watching wet concrete dry over my grandfather's spring. All I knew was that a woman in a blazer had just told me my land wasn't mine anymore, and that she'd said it with the kind of smile people use when they've done this before and gotten away with it every single time. I didn't say a word to her that day, not one. I had spent 40 years reading contour maps and knowing that the man who talks first in a dispute is usually the man who loses it. So I stood there, hands in my jacket pockets, and I watched. I noted the time on my phone, 2:47 p.m., same minute she opened her mouth. I've kept that habit since my engineering days. You write down when something happens before you write down what it means. Meaning comes later. Time doesn't lie. I took photographs. The wet concrete, still glossy. The HOA truck, license plate and all. The 2 men in polos, Kessler Property Management stitched over the pocket, not Cedar Hollow HOA, a private company, which struck me as strange even then. I photographed the notice stapled to my own fence post, though I hadn't given anyone permission to staple anything to my fence. The notice was addressed to property owner, Blue Vein Parcel, and cited a Cedar Hollow Estates architectural control violation, Section 4.2, unpermitted structure encroachment. The spring house my grandfather built in 1911, apparently, was now in violation of covenants written in 2015, 4 years before I even inherited the land. Fine assessed, $11,000 due in 30 days, or a lien would be filed against the property. I read it twice. Then I folded it, put it in a Ziploc bag, force of habit, evidence stays clean, and drove 40 minutes into town to the post office, where I mailed myself a copy by certified mail, return receipt requested. That's a trick an old judge friend taught me years back. A postmarked letter to yourself is a poor man's notary. It proves what you had, and when you had it, without paying a lawyer a dime. I mailed a copy to the county clerk's office too, requesting they log it as a matter of public record dispute under Texas Property Code Section 202.004, Unreasonable Restrictions on Land Use by a Property Owners Association. I didn't know yet if it would matter, but my father always said, paperwork is just patience with a paper trail. 3 days later, Deborah Kessler came to my door herself. She didn't knock so much as rap the door frame with one knuckle, like she was testing whether the house itself would answer. I opened it, and she smiled that thin smile again, clipboard tucked under one arm, sunglasses pushed up into blonde hair. Mr. Prentice, I wanted to speak with you personally, homeowner to homeowner. I'm not a homeowner in your association, Mrs. Kessler. Not yet, she said, like it was a fact still pending. But the encroachment issue affects both our properties. The spring house sits directly on the boundary line the surveyors flagged. The boundary line your surveyors flagged, I said, not the county's. Her smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. The estate has invested heavily in the wellness spa. Our members expect exclusivity. I'm sure you understand, being a reasonable man. I am a reasonable man, I said, which is why I'd like to see the deed that gives you rights to cap a spring on my land. She laughed, short and bright, like I'd made a joke at a dinner party. Mr. Prentice, the spring flows from the aquifer beneath Cedar Hollow Estates. Your grandfather's little pipe just happened to tap it first. We've had our attorneys confirm the shared resource doctrine applies. I didn't correct her, not then. I just said, I'll want that in writing. And I wrote down the time, 4:12 p.m., the moment she said shared resource doctrine out loud to a licensed engineer without a single document to back it up. She left without another word, boots crunching gravel, Range Rover door thudding shut like a period at the end of a sentence she thought she'd already won. That night I couldn't sleep, not from anger, from memory. I kept thinking about the spring, the way it used to steam in January, the way my grandfather would stand over it with his coffee and say, "This is the only thing on this ranch that never runs dry, Walt. Everything else you gotta pray for. This, you just gotta protect." So I went looking for the tube. It was still in the tack room, exactly where it had always been, wedged behind a set of harness hooks nobody had used in decades. Cardboard soft with age, smelling of dust and neat's foot oil. I unrolled the vellum sheets on the kitchen table under the good lamp, careful as handling a newborn. There it was, Ezra's 1911 survey, his cramped handwriting noting spring temperature, flow rate, mineral content. And beneath it, my own 1987 addendum, pipe specifications, pressure calculations, and at the bottom right corner, my signature, Walter E. Prentice, P.E., license number 41207, dated June 14, 1987. I remembered signing it. I remembered the county inspector, a heavy-set man named Gerald Combs, shaking my hand and saying, "Son, you just gave 40 future houses free heat for the next century." I hadn't thought about those words in over 30 years. 40 future houses. That's when it hit me, not like lightning, more like the slow drop of a stone into still water, rings spreading outward. The pipe I built in 1987 didn't just serve my ranch, it was designed, at the county's request, to extend service capacity toward the undeveloped land downhill, land that eventually became Cedar Hollow Estates. My signature wasn't just proof of ownership, it was proof the entire development's geothermal heating depended on a system I'd engineered, on my grandfather's water, under a permit issued to my family, never to Cedar Hollow, never to Deborah Kessler. I spent the next 2 weeks doing what I do best, reading records instead of arguing with people. County Recorder's Office, State Water Board Archives. I requested copies of every permit Cedar Hollow Estates had filed regarding geothermal use since 2015. There weren't many. In fact, there was exactly one, an application for a wellness amenity feasibility study, filed by Kessler Property Management, never approved, never followed by an actual water rights transfer. Which meant the shared resource doctrine Deborah Kessler quoted to my face didn't exist. Not in any statute, not in any filing. She'd built a spa on a spring she had no legal claim to, using water piped through infrastructure I had personally designed, stamped and still legally owned a pertinent rights to under Ezra's 1958 will. It was around this time I met Arlene Whitfield. She lived 2 houses down from the clubhouse, in one of the original 46 homes tied to the old geothermal line. A widow, 78 years old, husband a Korean War veteran who'd passed 6 years back. She used a cane most days and oxygen at night, a thin tube looping under her nose, the soft hiss of the concentrator humming in her front room like a tired cricket. I found her sitting on her porch one October afternoon, wrapped in a blanket despite the mild weather, watching HOA trucks roll past toward the clubhouse. "You're the Prentice boy," she said, before I'd even introduced myself. "Ezra's grandson. I remember your granddaddy bringing us jars of that mineral water when Frank had his bad lungs. Said it cleared the chest better than any doctor's syrup." We talked for an hour that day. She told me Kessler's people had come by twice already, pressuring her to sign a voluntary amenity fee waiver in exchange for testifying, if it ever came to that the spring had always belonged to the estates. She'd refused both times. In return, her HOA dues had mysteriously doubled, and a letter arrived citing her oxygen concentrator's exterior cord as an unsightly exterior modification, fine due within 30 days. "They're squeezing me because I won't lie for them," she said, hands trembling slightly around her coffee mug. "I'm 78 years old, Mr. Prentice. I don't have the energy to fight a woman with a clipboard and a lawyer." I looked at her oxygen line, then down the hill at the clubhouse with its heated pool steaming gently in the cold October air, water pulled straight from my grandfather's spring, sold to people at $6,800 a membership, while a widowed veteran's wife froze over a $50 cord. That was the moment this stopped being about property lines. That was the moment I decided Deborah Kessler was going to learn exactly what appurtenant meant in a courtroom in front of every person she'd ever sold a lie to. I started with the water board. Texas Water Code, Section 11.001, makes clear that surface water belongs to the state, held in trust, but groundwater rights follow the rule of capture, tied to the land where the well or spring originates. My grandfather's spring wasn't a well, it was a natural discharge point, documentation, permitted, appurtenant to the Blue Vein parcel since 1958. I filed for a formal determination with the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, requesting they confirm ownership and flow rights before anyone built another gallon of profit on top of my family's water. I didn't tell Deborah Kessler I'd filed. I didn't tell anyone. I've learned that the quietest lawsuits are the ones that win, because nobody gets the chance to destroy evidence before the ink dries. While I waited on the state's response, I went back to basics. I walked the pipe route myself, the way I had in 1987, boots crunching over frost-hardened ground, checking every joint I remembered welding by hand. I photographed the concrete cap Kessler's crew had poured over the spring mouth, cracked already in 2 places from thermal expansion nobody bothered to calculate for. I photographed the clubhouse spa, steam rising off a heated pool at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, while 30 yards downhill, Arlene Whitfield's furnace strained to keep her living room above 60 degrees. That contrast, spa water steaming for members in swimsuits, while an old widow layered blankets over her knees, became the photograph I'd eventually need most. I just didn't know it yet. The first real crime happened on a Thursday, November 9th, 6:52 a.m., and I have it on video because I'd finally installed 2 trail cameras along my fence line, the kind ranchers use for coyotes, motion-triggered, infrared, time-stamped. I wasn't hunting coyotes anymore. The footage shows 2 men in Kessler Property Management polos climbing my fence, not at the gate, over the fence, wire cutters in hand. They cut through 8 feet of my grandfather's original livestock fencing, dragging a small generator and a masonry saw toward the spring cap. My trail camera caught Deborah Kessler herself, arriving 11 minutes later in the Range Rover, stepping out in heels, sinking into soft mud, directing the men with sharp hand gestures while she stood well back from the actual work, like a woman who'd learned exactly how much distance keeps a person's fingerprints off a crime. They were trying to cut a secondary tap into the cap, redirecting more flow toward the clubhouse pool, because, as I'd learned soon enough, membership complaints about tepid water had spiked once the cold weather hit, and Kessler needed the spa hotter, faster, whatever the cost to the pipe network below. I didn't call the sheriff that morning. I know how that sounds, but an isolated trespass charge, filed too early, gives a woman with money and lawyers time to settle quietly, apologize publicly, and walk away with nothing but a scolding. I wanted something that couldn't be settled. I wanted it woven so tight into fraud and public endangerment that no attorney on earth could talk a DA into dropping it. So I called Gerald Combs instead. Retired now, 71 years old, but he still remembered inspecting my pipe extension in 1987, still remembered the county records better than most active clerks. Over coffee at his kitchen table, I laid out everything. The original drawings, my TCEQ filing, the trespass footage, Kessler's non-existent water permit. Gerald went quiet for a long moment, turning his mug slowly. "Walt," he said, "you understand what you're describing isn't just an HOA squabble. If she's selling geothermal contracts on water she never had rights to and collecting money for it, that's not a covenant violation. That's wire fraud. If she's taking payments electronically, that's securities fraud if she called those memberships investments. You're not fighting your neighbor anymore. You're sitting on a federal case. I sat with that a long while after he said it. $2.4 million doesn't come from an HOA raising dues. It comes from people believing a lie, in writing, with signatures. I requested public records on Cedar Hollow Wellness Spa LLC, the entity Kessler had formed to sell those founders' memberships. Texas Business Organizations Code requires registered agents and filed formation documents. I pulled them all. The LLC listed Deborah Kessler as sole managing member. Bank records I couldn't access directly, but member testimonials I could. Dozens of homeowners had posted online, thanking Kessler for locking in geothermal heat rates for life months before the spa ever opened, months before a single permit application had even been filed with the state. I began collecting affidavits, quietly, homeowners willing to state, in writing, what they'd paid and what they'd been promised. Most were furious once they understood the spring wasn't hers to sell. A few were still loyal to her, still believed the shared resource doctrine she'd invented out of thin air. I didn't argue with those. I just kept building my file, one signature at a time. Like laying pipe, you don't rush the joints. You just make sure each one holds before you move to the next. The second red line came on November 22nd, a bitter Wednesday, wind cutting sideways off the ridge. Arlene Whitfield's oxygen concentrator failed at 4:15 in the morning, not from any fault of hers, but because Kessler's crew had rerouted electrical load to the clubhouse spa heaters 2 days earlier, overloading the shared transformer serving the older homes on Cedar Hollow Lane. Arlene's daughter found her disoriented, blue-lipped, called an ambulance that arrived at 4:52 a.m. 40 minutes because the county's rural response time on a frozen road was what it was. She survived. Barely. 3 nights in the hospital for hypoxia, her doctor telling her plainly that another 20 minutes without oxygen might have killed her. I visited her the day she came home, oxygen line back in place, blanket back over her knees, but something in her had gone quiet in a way that frightened me more than her illness had. "They almost killed me for a hot tub, Walter," she said. "For rich people's bathwater." That was the morning I stopped being careful and started being precise. There's a difference. Careful hesitates. Precise moves once and moves correctly. I sent Deborah Kessler a certified letter, return receipt requested, copy to the county attorney, copy to TCEQ, formally notifying her, as required under Texas Property Code Section 202.006, that the Blue Vein parcel's water rights were under active state review, that any continued diversion of flow constituted trespass upon a protected resource, and that any further unauthorized construction on my property would be documented and referred for criminal trespass charges under Texas Penal Code Section 30.05. I sent a second letter to every homeowner on the Founders Membership list, not accusing anyone of anything, simply stating facts, that the spring's ownership was under formal dispute, that geothermal service to their homes might be interrupted pending resolution, and that they should retain copies of any payment records related to the Cedar Hollow Wellness Spa LLC. That letter did more work in 1 week than any lawsuit could have. People began asking questions in the clubhouse lobby. People began comparing membership contracts over coffee, noticing dates that didn't line up, promises that contradicted each other depending on who'd signed you up. I also filed, quietly, a request with the county for an emergency safety inspection of the shared electrical transformer, citing Arlene Whitfield's hospitalization as evidence of an immediate public hazard. That inspection, once approved, would require a licensed inspector on site, a sheriff's deputy for load balancing disputes on utility easements, and, critically, public notice posted at the clubhouse 48 hours in advance. which meant that whatever happened next, whatever Deborah Kessler decided to do under pressure, with an inspector and a deputy both scheduled to arrive, she would do it in front of witnesses. I didn't know yet exactly what she'd do. I only knew, the way I used to know a pipe joint was about to fail under pressure, that something was coming. You feel it before you see it, a faint hum in the line, a stress point about to give. I made sure, this time, that when it gave, the whole street would be watching. The inspection was set for Friday, December 6th, 10 a.m. Frost still silvered the grass when I arrived, and I remember the sound most, the low mechanical whine of the county inspector's van, mixed with the hiss of steam still curling weakly off the cracked concrete cap on my land, like the spring itself was waiting to exhale. Deputy Ray Alvarez arrived first, unhurried, clipboard of his own in hand, though his carried actual legal weight. Then the TCEQ field inspector, a quiet woman named Priya Nair, who'd been reviewing my water rights filing for 3 weeks and had, 2 days earlier, issued a preliminary determination. The Blue Vein Springs flow and mineral rights were confirmed appurtenant to my property under the 1958 Prentice Will, with zero legal transfer of rights ever recorded to Cedar Hollow Estates or Kessler Property Management. Deborah Kessler didn't know that yet. She came striding down from the clubhouse in a cream wool coat, heels clicking on frozen gravel, clipboard under her arm like armor. Behind her, a small crowd had gathered, homeowners, drawn by the posted public notice, curious about the emergency utility inspection the county had scheduled. Among them, in a wheelchair her daughter pushed slowly across the frost, was Arlene Whitfield, oxygen tube looped under her nose, wrapped in 3 blankets, eyes sharp despite everything her body had been through. "Mr. Prentice," Kessler said, voice pitched for the crowd now, not just for me. "I hope you understand this inspection changes nothing. The spa's water rights were established through proper development agreements." "Which development agreements?" Inspector Nair asked, stepping forward before I could answer. "Because our office has no record of any transfer of appurtenant water rights from the Prentice parcel to Cedar Hollow Estates, ever. We do, however, have your LLC's marketing materials, which reference guaranteed geothermal access as a permanent asset of membership." Kessler's smile didn't fully leave her face, but it thinned into something closer to a grimace. "Those materials reflect a business relationship with the property owner." "There is no business relationship," I said, and this time I did speak, because it was finally time. "There never was a contract. There was a fence you cut, a cap you poured without my permission, and a pipe you diverted that I built with my own hands in 1987. I pulled the vellum sheet from the document tube I'd carried under my arm the whole morning, and I unrolled it slowly, right there in front of Deputy Alvarez, Inspector Nair, and 40 or so neighbours standing in the cold. Ezra's original 1911 survey, my own 1987 signature beneath it, county stamp still legible after all these years. "This is the drawing that built the pipe under your clubhouse," I said. "My licence number's right here. Deputy, this proves the geothermal line serving Cedar Hollow Estates was engineered under my family's permit on my family's water with no rights ever assigned to any HOA or private company." The crowd went very quiet. Somewhere behind me, I heard Arlene exhale, slow and satisfied, like a woman who'd waited a long time to watch a lie run out of road. Kessler's composure cracked then, all at once, the way concrete does when the frost finally wins. "This is absurd," she snapped. "I have members who paid for services rendered." "Services you never had the right to sell," Inspector Nair said. "Ma'am, I need to inform you that diverting a state-monitored thermal resource without permit, after formal written notice of an ownership dispute, constitutes a violation under Texas Water Code Section 11.081, unauthorized use of state water. Combined with the trespass documented on Mr. Prentice's property, she nodded toward Deputy Alvarez. That's a matter for law enforcement, not the county board. That's when Deputy Alvarez stepped forward with the second piece of the trap I'd built weeks earlier. The trail camera footage, subpoenaed and reviewed, showing Kessler directing the November 9th fence cutting and cap drilling in person. He held up his phone, footage paused on her own face, mid-gesture, mud on her heels. "Deborah Kessler," he said, "I'm placing you under arrest for criminal trespass and unauthorized diversion of a protected water resource, pending further charges from the District Attorney's Office regarding the sale of fraudulent membership contracts." She actually laughed, one sharp, disbelieving bark, looking around at the crowd like she expected someone to intervene on her behalf. Nobody did. I watched homeowners who defended her a month earlier now stepping back, faces hard, arms crossed, the particular silence of people realizing exactly how thoroughly they'd been played. The handcuffs made a small, flat click in the cold air. Her clipboard slipped from under her arm and landed face down in the frost, pages fanning out, membership logos bleeding faint pink ink into the wet grass. I didn't gloat. I'd promised myself that much, weeks earlier, kneeling by my grandfather's grave with my hand on the cold headstone. I just knelt down, picked the clipboard up out of the mud, and handed it to Deputy Alvarez as evidence, the way you'd hand over any other tool that had finally worn out its use. Arlene Whitfield reached out from her wheelchair and took my hand as Kessler was led past her toward the patrol car. Kessler didn't look at either of us. She stared straight ahead, cream coat collecting frost, heels sinking one final time into the mud she'd forced onto my land 3 months earlier. The trial took 8 months. Deborah Kessler was convicted on charges including theft by deception, unauthorized diversion of state water resources, and securities fraud tied to the founders' membership contracts, which Texas courts determined qualified as unregistered investment instruments given their promised returns in guaranteed utility savings. Total restitution ordered, $2,412,000, covering all 340 membership refunds, plus interest, legal fees, and Arlene Whitfield's hospital costs from the November transformer failure. Kessler received 7 years, with restitution garnished from remaining assets, including the Range Rover sold at auction for $18,000, a small, almost insulting fraction of what she'd have to repay. Her property manager, a man named Curtis Dell who'd cut my fence with his own hands, took a plea deal, probation, community service, and testimony against Kessler in exchange for reduced trespass charges. He apologized to me once in the courthouse hallway, said he'd only been following instructions. I told him instructions don't cut fences by themselves. The Cedar Hollow HOA board, most of them innocent, simply misled, dissolved the Wellness Spa LLC entirely and voted unanimously to formally recognize the Blue Vein Spring as my family's sole property, a pertinent right confirmed, with a new legal easement agreement I drafted myself, granting reasonable heating access back to the original 46 homes at fair, documented cost. Nothing hidden, nothing oversold. Arlene Whitfield was elected the new HOA president 3 weeks after Kessler's arrest, unopposed. Her first act was waiving all fines ever issued against her oxygen equipment, and mine, retroactively, striking them from the record entirely. I still walk down to the spring most mornings, the way Ezra used to, coffee in hand, watching steam rise clean and unclaimed off the water, now that the concrete's been jackhammered away. The cracks in the old cap are gone. The pipe's been repaired, properly. My own signature added once more to the county file. Dated this year, right below the 1987 line, right below Ezra's from 1911. Here's what I learned, standing over that water so many mornings this past year. Land remembers who built it, long after paperwork tries to say otherwise. A clipboard isn't a deed. And the people who cut fences quietest are usually the ones who talk loudest in public. Arlene still comes down some afternoons, oxygen tank in her little wagon, sitting on the bench I built near the graves, telling me stories about my grandfather's mineral water clearing her husband's lungs 60 years ago. She says the whole street sleeps warmer this winter than it has in a decade. I told her that's not the last thing either of us will need to fix around here. There's a new development going up 2 ridges over, and I hear their sales brochure already mentions geothermal adjacent property values. I've started keeping the tube of old drawings a little closer to the front door these days,